I'm Claire Parker.
And I'm Ashley Hamilton.
And this is
Celebrity Memoir Book Club.
Stay on your toes.
The podcast where we are cooking up our version of each book. And if you want the original version, just go read it. But if you like our version, stick around. We're happy to have you here.
And if you like us so much you want to come see us live, we are coming to Charlotte, North Carolina, June 18th for our show makeup.
And, oh my God, we are going to be in Columbus, Ohio tomorrow.
Oh my God, I hope to see you guys there.
I'm really excited about it. Claire, if you were to write a memoir, what would you title last week's chapter?
Good and bad.
Okay.
Good and bad, up and down.
Tell me your ups, tell me your downs.
I'll start with the downs. I have to come clean. I have to tell you something. I don't know which week it was that I came forth with my addiction and my problem, but in real life, I recorded that episode just last week, and this week, I'm back to tell you I have already used retinol again.
You have a disorder.
I woke up this morning with my lip cracked in half.
I'm so uninterested in this problem from now on.
I understand that. Mac had the same feeling. I've never had him turn on me physically. Like he turned away from me and would not continue speaking. The thing is that you have to understand is I didn't use it for wrinkles. I used it because I had a pimple. And
but that's how you've been using it the last 7 times.
I know, but I just thought this time would be different.
Fool you once, shame on the retinol. Fool you 18 times, shame on you, Claire.
But can I say, actually, shame on you, Ashley.
You.
I have come forth to my friends, my families, my loved ones, my lover, and I've said very specifically, I clearly have a problem and I'm begging for help.
Well, I come to you, Claire, a quoter of your own self. At what age are women responsible?
I kind of think, ask for help and ye shall receive. Like, I'm asking someone to come to my house and throw it out. I'm powerless. Have you ever been to Al-Anon? I'm Retinol. I need somebody to come over and just throw it out in the dead of night right before I'm going to sleep. It takes but a moment to fuck myself over, and I need somebody to come pry it from my hands and throw it away. Let me help you help me.
I'll try to remember.
I need somebody to come help me. I'm begging. I'm powerless. It is an addiction. It really is. There's something so wrong here.
It's so random the way you're just especially because
I'm so anti-skincare.
It took you 10 years to consider washing your face, and now you're addicted to one item that you don't even
I wonder if it's the quick fixiness of the way that people are retinol heals your acne, heals your wrinkles, makes you perfect.
Okay, but the thing is, if it had ever quick fixed you, I would understand. But because you've only ever ruined your own life with this thing, I don't get it.
I will tell you something.
What?
I had 3 days in October 2022.
Okay.
Where my skin was so beautiful and I was using retinol every day because I don't think my skin knew to fight back yet. It was so confused. And that was actually a really beautiful week of my life. And then very quickly my face fell off like the mummy.
Okay.
I was in that movie Two-Face.
Yikes. Except for it was just one face all falling off.
Yeah. It was half of a face, but not cut vertically or horizontally. It was cut
sloughing off in
the
layers.
dermis. It was a peeled face like an orange. My good is I'm doing really well on my summer of my life plans. I am saying yes in ways no one's ever seen me say yes before.
We were out till 6 a.m. last weekend.
I saw the sun come out. And Mac was like, I don't think I've done that since my heyday. And I was like, this is my heyday.
You're living your heyday.
I've never had a heyday. I'm 31 years old. I'm partying like a psychopath. Not a psychopath, but I've never been up late before. People are just saying, hey, you want a shot? And do you know what I say?
You said yes.
I said yes, and I could feel the shot giver, my friend, be like, I didn't expect that. Okay. I'm saying yes. I'm having fun. I'm enjoying myself, and I'm so excited. A lot of people may not see this as an incredible act of discipline to keep having fun with your friends, but I'm giving it all I've got, and I'm really proud of myself. And this weekend, we actually did have a fun party night. We went to SNL with the express purpose of meeting Dua Lipa.
And finding out if she listens to our podcast.
Because if you have been a longtime listener, you may remember when she put us in her newsletter as one of her favorite podcasts. So we went all the way to SNL because I was like, wow, what a huge night for Dua Lipa. She's hosting, she's a musical guest, and now she gets to meet her podcast idols. What a cherry on top of the sundae for her. Am I right?
Oh, what I wouldn't give to be Dua Lipa for that reason only.
So we went and we actually did meet her, and we got to the bottom of whether or not our podcast is actually one of her top 5 favorite podcasts. And we're going to tell the whole story on the Patreon, and the answer may surprise you. So tune in.
Wow, what a cliff to dangle off of.
But yeah, greatest weekend of my life, only dampened slightly by the fact that I woke up this morning with very chapped left top lip.
Do you want to ask me about my week?
I know about it kind of because I was there, but I guess you could tell the people. Tell them how your week was, Ashley.
Okay, well, I too am an addict, and I have today embarked in a step to change my life because it also has to do with the summer of my life living, but also regular life living. You guys know I've been struggling to get off my phone. I love it. I love looking at it, and I think that, not to blame the pandemic for everything that's ever gone wrong, but I do think I used to live a much more adventurous life. And then I got used to long stretches of time sitting at home by myself and looking at my phone. And now I've like reestablished my life around long periods of scrolling time because I was like, why does everything in the world take me so fucking long? But it's because after I accomplish anything ever, I sit and look at my phone for 20 minutes to 2 hours. That's a lot to schedule around, you know?
It's worse than having a kid.
Exactly.
It's more time consuming.
Exactly. So I just got this really intense app called Jomo, and I've set it to block social media 24/7. You have to go into the app. It makes you wait 10 seconds to pause your blockings. And then you can pause them for like 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. So if I want to go on social media at all, 24 hours a day, I have to wait 10 seconds in this app. And then I only have 10 minutes and then it throws you out on your ass.
I love that. I think you have just inspired me this week to go get from a box I put it in once an entire year ago when I moved, my little phone locker.
I feel like it's already really helping because it's helping me like break the habit.
I remember back when I used to edit the podcast, I was so acutely aware of how the minute there was a part that was like I had to make a decision or I was at all stressed out, the way I reached for my phone to like get myself out of any single second of feeling unsure or stressed or bored or like anxious.
Yeah. And there are certain things. So I didn't block email. I didn't block texting. I didn't block phone calls and stuff because I do feel like those are like part of work. I don't want to be like blockading myself from normal communication, especially like if you're meeting someone somewhere. Just I feel like those I'm fine with. But the way I like mindlessly check notifications, the way I mindlessly just scroll through apps, and it was making me so sad because I don't know if you guys know this, the world isn't that good right now. And so I was just feeling depressed all the time. And I want to get back in the habit of just doing other things, even just watching regular TV or reading books or going for a walk. I was checking Twitter when I would go for a walk. What the hell is wrong with me?
We need to put my retinol on your phone.
Oh, and I didn't block Spotify either because I just want to be able to listen to music.
You're allowed. I decided you're allowed.
Thank you. Do you know what I was listening to today?
Me singing.
Japanese Breakfast.
Oh, yeah? That's so perfect because today we're talking about Japanese breakfast zone, Michelle Zauner. Crying in H Mart, I do think we need to start with a small acknowledgement. I, for years, have said we will not do this book on the podcast, and not out of disparagement, but because I actually have read this book on my own. I really enjoyed it, and I felt that this book fell more in the memoir category than the celebrity category. I think that actually, I mean, I don't actually know the numbers. I don't know if Crying in H Mart, the book, did better than Japanese Breakfast, the touring band, but I did feel that this book was written by a writer, and I think the important thing about the medium of book writing is you've chosen to write down your story for a reason because the way you're telling it is just as important as what you're telling. I think for a lot of celebrity memoirs, that is not the case. I think they like the all-encompassing seriousness of a memoir, but I wouldn't say their voice, like the writer's voice, is as important as the story they're telling. I try to be cautious of letting this podcast be something that just like chews up art and spits it out for parts. That being said, we are now like 200 memoirs in and rent calls every month, and we must sometimes throw our integrity out the window and renege on past promises in order to put out another fucking episode.
I will say, I also think that our boundaries have gotten blurrier, and I don't think we're chewing up and spitting out art. I think we've gotten more to a place where we're looking to appreciate some art while we stomp grapes of other art. I think that we've read a lot of really unenjoyable books lately, and I, for one, felt like it was quite a breath of fresh air to read something beautifully written and purposeful.
I forgot how much I could like reading.
Yeah.
I feel that so many of these books have been such a slog for me that to read this in one setting, this is my third time reading it because I read it for myself, and then I believe I read it for a book club that we had 1 or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And then reading it today, I cried. Like, truly, it is such a fast read because it's very compelling and easy to read, except for the times when you have to stop and contemplate mortality and your loved ones and cry a bit.
Yeah.
That's like the really only roadblocks to a speed read.
Totally.
It's like I was truly crying. I don't know when the last time I cried was. Maybe Heather, what's her name's grimoire.
Oh, Hillary Burton Morgan. So without further ado,
Crying in H Mart. It is a book that came out 2 or 3 years ago. I think it's very recent.
2021.
By Michelle Zauner, who is the singer, musician, writer of Japanese Breakfast. I do think you probably know this book. But I don't know. What do you think?
I think people have seen it. It was a very hot book.
I meant, like, what do you think is more successful, her writing career or her music career?
I think the music career is quite successful. I think that if you're talking about this book within the literary world versus Japanese Breakfast within the music world, this book topped lists in a way that Japanese Breakfast has not topped charts.
Yeah.
But I think that they're both successful projects.
Yes. Would you call this a celebrity memoir?
Maybe. I think that they really like compounded off of each other.
No, I agree. But I feel like this isn't like the memoir of a celebrity.
Right.
It's a famous memoir by somebody who's an artist.
I would call her like celebritish. That's what I meant by like they compounded off of each other. Like I think that the book got initial recognition because of her following from the band. And then the book took off and then the band got more recognition because of the new audience that the book found. Because of like algorithms, more people are finding the band as the band gets more popular and more people are finding the book as the book gets more popular. Do you know what I mean? I think they ping pong back and forth. And then, you know, she does celebrity things. Like she's been photographed in fashion magazines before and after this book came out. She goes to big events. But this book has definitely helped heighten the celebrity of a person who I would say before this book, she was more famous than some of the people we've covered.
Interesting. Really?
Probably. I mean, we've covered some real randos.
Stephanie Madoff Mac. Friend of the pod.
Ever since my mom died, I cry in H Mart.
So it starts with today, as all great memoirs do.
H Mart is a supermarket that specializes in Asian food, and the H stands for a Korean phrase that translates to one armful of groceries.
So the book begins talking about how going to H Mart will often reduce her to tears, as opposed to other things that might be seemingly more emotional, like looking at photos of her mom as her mom passed away. Growing up in America with a Caucasian father and a Korean mother, I relied on my mom for access to her Korean heritage. While she never actually taught me how to cook, she did raise me with a distinctly Korean appetite.
The concept of prepping meals for the week was a ludicrous affront to our lifestyle. We chased our cravings daily.
Food was how my mother expressed her love, no matter how critical or cruel she could seem, constantly pushing me to meet her intractable expectations. I could always feel her affection radiating from the lunches she packed and the meals she prepared for me just the way I liked them.
I can hardly speak Korean, but in H Mart, it feels like I'm fluent. My grief comes in waves and is usually triggered by something arbitrary. And she talks about the moments that she went through caring for her mom as she was dying, and then just seeing a little kid in the H Mart and how it reminds her of herself with her mom. And those are the moments that really send her. And then she talks about being angry at the people she observes at the H Mart. Life is unfair, and sometimes it helps to intentionally blame someone for it. Sometimes my grief feels as though I've been left alone in a room with no doors. Every time I remember that my mother is dead, it feels like I'm colliding with a wall that won't give. And I think that one thing this book does really well is talk about the anger and these like specific feelings that are really hard to talk about. And the way they get so specific really makes them so general. And it's one of the most effective things about this book is how specific it is. She is literally describing to the ingredient her mom's take on a recipe. But the way that she analyzes it and expresses it is such a universal feeling of grief.
Yeah, just sitting there feeling angry at every person who's older than her mom and being like, why do you get to be alive?
Yeah. And I think it's so moving that a lot of those feelings are not likable, but they're very relatable. Like, it's not nice to say when I look around a room, I wish all these people were dead and my mom was still alive, but it's true.
My mother died on October 18th, 2014, a date I'm always forgetting. Her father, however, is obsessed with dates. Some sort of internal clock whirs without fail around every impending birthday, death day, anniversary, and holiday. He'll send her a Facebook message about how unfair it all is and how I'll never know what it's like to lose your best friend. Then he'll go back to riding his motorcycle around Fuck It, where he retired a year after she died, filling the void with warm beaches and street-vended seafood and young girls who can't spell the word problem.
What I never seem to forget is what my mother ate. She was a woman of many usuals.
I remember these things clearly because that's how my mother loved you, not through white lies and constant verbal affirmation, but in subtle observations of what brought you joy, pocketed away to make you feel comforted and cared for without even realizing it. She remembered if you liked your stews with extra broth, if you were sensitive to spice, if you hated tomatoes. She remembered which Bonjan side dishes you emptied first, so the next time you were over it, it'd be set with a heaping double portion. I'm also going to say there's a lot of Korean food in here. I'm going to mispronounce it. If that's going to make you want to kill yourself, stop listening. I can't help it.
We're trying our best.
I was never taught Korean. I'm sorry. I know that makes me unqualified to discuss celebrity memoirs, but here we are.
Okay, so then she gets into how her parents met. Her dad responded to an ad in the Philadelphia Inquirer about a job opportunity in South Korea. He checked in at a hotel. The first person he met was the woman working at the front desk, who was the mom. They ended up together and they moved to a couple of different countries chasing job opportunities before eventually settling in Eugene, Oregon.
When Michelle was 1, so she was born in Korea.
Yes.
And when they were 10 years old, they moved outside of this small town, Eugene, and they're kind of more in the, not even the suburbs. It sounds like more like rural, kind of farmish land. I loved our new home, but I also came to resent it. There were no neighborhood children to play with, no convenience stores or parks within biking distance. I was stranded and lonely, an only child with no one to talk to or turn to but my mother. And so then she starts talking about how her mother raised her with like a tough love that was so tough it like almost killed you.
She was not what I referred to as a mommy mom.
When I got hurt, my mom was livid as if I had maliciously damaged her property. Hers was tougher than tough love. It was brutal industrial strength, a sinewy love that never gave way to an inch of weakness. It was a love that saw what was best for you 10 steps ahead and didn't care if it hurt like hell in the meantime.
When I got hurt, she felt it so deeply as if it was her own affliction. She was only guilty of caring too much. I realize this now only in retrospect. No one in this world would ever love me as much as my mother, and she would never let me forget it.
Stop crying, save your tears for when your mother dies, was something that she would always say to her.
So her mom was beautiful and very meticulous about her home, about the way she presented herself, about her food. Her perfection was infuriating. Her meticulousness was a complete enigma. She could own a piece of clothing for 10 years and it would look like it had never been worn.
She talks about all her skincare stuff, and this was obviously 20, 30 years ago. She had a 10-step Korean skincare regime, which now is like the hallmark of every YouTuber, but I was like, ugh, this has been around forever. And then she was also using a microcurrent wand 20 years ago.
Wow.
So I'm kind of like, if that just got here now, what other advances do we not know about? Should I be trying retinol?
Well, that's why beauty bloggers are always going to Korea now to be like, what's your guys' thing? And I swear to fucking God, if you put another retinol on your face, I'll kill you. I'll kill you myself.
So I spent my child divided between two impulses, engaging in the intrinsic tomboyish whims that led to her reprimands and clinging to my mother, desperate to please her.
She would do a lot of cleaning around the house. Whenever her parents would leave, she would clean all their trinkets and all their counters, hoping that when her parents came home, they would say, "You're such a good girl."
Yeah, she's like, I had this weird thing where I was bored and lonely, but I had no one to turn to but my mom. But I think that's true of a lot of little kids. A lot of little kids want their mother's approval.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like just a farmland rural situation. I waited desperately for other such opportunities to shine, and in my search for favorable proving grounds, discovered that our shared appreciation of Korean food served not only as a form of mother-daughter bonding, but also a pure and abiding source of approval. She had a very Anthony Bourdain story of like from a young age eating foods like eels and fresh seafood and getting a lot of praise for her courage in eating. My family lauded my bravery. I radiated with pride, and something about that moment set me on a path. I came to realize that while I struggled to be good, I could excel at being courageous.
So she was like a loud and difficult to tame child. She was known as kind of a troublemaker.
The famous bad girl is what her aunt would call her.
Yeah, and I think that she had a lot of trouble with not being able to communicate with the Korean side of her family that I think contributed to a lot of these behaviors and why she would act out when they would go on these 6-week trips to Korea every summer. But then getting the praise from being able to try all these interesting foods, she really reveled on it.
So growing up, her mom would take her to Korea to visit her aunts and grandmother for 6 weeks every summer. And that was like a really important bonding experience for them.
In Seoul, my mom was like a kid again. Standing at the counter, we'd open every Tupperware container and snack together in the humid kitchen. Sweet braised black soybeans, crisp yellow sprouts with scallion and sesame oil, and tart juicy cucumber kimchi were shoveled into our mouths behind spoonfuls of warm lavender kongbap straight from the open rice cooker.
Once every visit, we would see my grandfather, always at the same Chinese restaurant. He was a tall, lean man with square jaw and a gentle but masculine features. As a young man, he had been a well-known voice actor for radio shows, but unfortunately, as TV became more prominent, he couldn't memorize his lines fast enough and his career sort of faded out. And then he lost all of the family money with bad investments by the time Michelle's mother was in elementary school. And so he disowned the family and left for another woman. And so they always visit him like once a year, I guess. And she says that her mom would always hand him some money when the grandmother wasn't looking.
Yeah.
And I was just like, ugh, why does the grandmother still have to go to dinner with this guy? Why is it her problem that this guy's got no money?
The grandma was a harsh lady. She spoke harshly and loudly and knew maybe 15 words in English, so it always seemed like she was angry. And she was just kind of uncomfortable around her grandma. She would always do this butt poking thing that she would hide from.
Yeah, she didn't like getting poked in the butthole. Weird. I can think of other ways to touch a young child that's not like stabbing them in the bunghole. If I was thinking of a way to show love, I maybe would give them a pat on the back.
I feel like my grandma was really pinchy and I would hide from her. I remember when I was younger, I had this exact experience of like hiding behind my mom because my grandma was always like pinching my arms and my legs. That's just how she showed affection, was like intense pinching. And I was like, stop pinching me. I don't like being pinched. And I forgot about it until I was reading this book. And I was like, oh yeah, I definitely used to hide from my grandma.
I guess my grandfather used to give me a big kiss on the cheek. And I was always like, ugh, gross. And I'd wipe it off and then go, good, rub it in.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
You might as well put your finger up their butt. If they don't like a kiss, give them a piece of this.
So one thing that she noticed in Seoul is that she was considered so beautiful. Strangers treated me like I was some kind of celebrity. Old ladies in shops would stop my mom and say her face is so small.
So she had a couple qualities because she was half white, half Korean that were considered very beautiful in Korea, like having a double eyelid and a small face.
And she talks about the way beauty was so intrinsically woven into Korean culture. There was a word for pretty that was used as a synonym for good or well-behaved. This fusion of moral and aesthetic approval was an early introduction to the value of beauty and the rewards it had in store.
Can I say, I love learning about other people's beauty standards. Because I'm like, face size? Well, there's something I never thought once about in my life.
You have a small face.
I know, and I almost feel like it's one of my worst qualities.
A small face on a small head. Maybe if you had a small face on a bigger head, it would look different to you.
I don't know. It's just so funny. I'm like, oh, I never even thought to be insecure about that. Good one, you guys. I've never once looked at a beautiful lady and been like, look at that head circumference. Look at that diameter from top to bottom. Perfect.
So she actually was recruited at one point to be a model, but her mom just kind of took the card and was like, we're absolutely not doing that. And she was like, why can't I? And her mom was like, you're not well behaved enough to let someone dress you up and mold you around.
Which is so true. I'm sorry. She could not have been a K-pop star.
Oh, of course not. But what I wanted to say about this is any parent could do this. All the child stars we've ever read, because look at this. Now she's famous. We're still reading her book. She did not have to be a child star in Korea for her to have a successful life in entertainment. If your kid wants to be a musician, be an actor, be a model, whatever, they could wait. She didn't have success until she was 26 or 27 years old. And I think that this book would not exist. She wouldn't have become a beautiful writer and a beautiful musician had she become a teenage model in Korea.
Yeah.
So take that, child star parents. You could just put the card in your pocket and say no.
When I found out my mother was sick, I'd been out of college for 4 years and I was well aware I didn't have much to show for it. I had a degree in creative writing and film I wasn't really using. I worked 3 part-time jobs and played guitar and sang in a rock band called Little Big League that no one had ever heard of. I rented a room for $300 in North Philly, the same city where my father grew up and from which he eventually fled to Korea when he was around my age. And so she starts talking about her relationship with her mom from the perspective of like a young adult and a teenager. They really got into it in high school. Somehow, as if overnight, every simple suggestion made me feel like I was overheating and my resentment and sensitivity grew and grew until they bubbled up and exploded in an instant, uncontrollably. I'd rip my body away and scream, stop touching me. Can't you ever leave me alone? Maybe I want wrinkles. Maybe I want reminders that I've lived my life. She went to college and it seems like the distance kind of helped them find their relationship again. Her mom would send her these care packages every month. And when they met up, it was less tense. But after she graduated, she decided to stick around Philadelphia because it was easy and cheap and because I was convinced the Little Big League might someday make it.
So then she plans this trip to New York. She's 25 years old and she was hoping to meet up with this friend of hers who was a music journalist. She thought that maybe someday when she quit making music, she would be able to become a music journalist and that would be her big serious career. I was going to New York that weekend in part to start laying the groundwork for something to fall back on. I find it very interesting that even though she was pursuing these creative dreams, like to her parents, it probably seemed blindly, she was always laying backup plans just in case, like a person who had that belief instilled in them.
I mean, she said, I had wound up doing exactly what my mother had warned me not to do. I was floundering in reality, living the life of an unsuccessful artist.
So she's in New York getting ready to have drinks with this journalist. And then she gets a text that her mom is going to the doctor. And she's very worried because her mom is not a doctor goer. So for her to agree to see a doctor, there must be something seriously wrong. And then as she is getting ready to meet this guy, her mom calls her to let her know that she has been diagnosed with cancer. How does a woman in perfect health go to a doctor about an upset stomach and leave with a cancer diagnosis?
They found a tumor in my stomach. They say it's cancerous, but they don't know how bad it is yet. They have to run some more tests. So she has this like drink with this old friend and she's like, I don't know, I'm sitting here playing this part, acting like I might move to New York and try and get a job. And she's like, meanwhile, in the back of my head, I know my whole life is about to change. I have to move home back to Eugene. She calls Peter and Peter had to work until 2 a.m.
That's her boyfriend.
At the bar that night. But he's like, I'll come up and get you right after. And he does, which is really sweet.
And she says, no, don't. But then he still shows up at like 4 a.m.
Because she was going to take the bus back the next day anyway. But he still comes, which I think is really sweet.
He seems really sweet.
Peter was the first person I dated that my mother had ever liked. She recalls the first time he meets her parents. They all go out for dinner in Philly at a Korean restaurant. And then the next day, they all go to a Korean spa together, which means that her boyfriend and her dad have to be naked together 24 hours after meeting, like full dick out, pube for show naked. But he does it, and they like him. He wins over their approval.
So this cancer that they believe she has at this point, there's a 3% survival without surgery. With surgery, it would take months to recover. And even then, there's only a 20% chance of emerging cancer-free. She wants to go move back with her parents. And they're like, don't, we can handle this. And I mean, luckily she refuses.
And when she calls her dad and says, I really want to come home, why won't you include me? He tells her, Mom's afraid you two will fight if you come. She knows she has to put all her focus into getting better.
I assumed the 7 years I'd lived away from home had healed the wounds between us, that the strain built up in my teenage years had been forgotten.
From day one, I'm told nothing about me was easy. By the time I was 3, Nami Emo had dubbed me the famous bad girl. By the second semester of 11th grade, what could have passed up to that point as a simple teenage angst had begun to escalate into a deeper depression. And then eventually she has like a nervous breakdown.
So her dad has a history of mental illness and also was a recovered addict, although it doesn't seem like he was ever
sober.
But
I guess he wasn't doing crystal meth.
Yeah. So he was recovered from crystal meth, but not a lot of other stuff. They saw my malaise as a luxury they'd paid for. My parents had given me too much, and now I was full of self-pity.
She used to get into fights, and she was obsessed with her best friend Nicole's mom, Colette. They lived together and had fun, and she says they were more friends than mother and daughter. Observing Colette made me question my own mother's dreams. Her lack of purpose seemed more and more an oddity, suspect, even anti-feminist. That Maya Carey played such a principal role in her life was a vocation I naively condemned, rebuffing the intense and visible labor as the errand work of a housewife who neglected to develop a passion or practical skill set. It wasn't until years later after I left for college that I began to understand what it meant to make a home and just how much of mine I had taken for granted. I flaunted my relationship with Colette as a way of taking advantage of my mother's emotions. I felt it was payback for how frequently she took advantage of mine.
So when she was in high school, she started getting really into music. There was this guy named Nick that she thought was cute who she wanted to play guitar with. So she started taking guitar lessons.
She used to go to a lot of performances and concerts. And she was obsessed with Karen O of the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, who was also half Korean. It's funny. She's like, on the one hand, it really inspired me to see someone who looked like me. But on the other hand, I was like, well, I can't do music. There's already a half Korean girl out there.
Yeah. So then she starts doing these open mics and slowly starts kind of playing these sets. I played benefits and developed a small local following, mostly friends and classmates I pressured into attendance until I was finally big enough to land a slot at the Wow Hall opening for Maria Taylor, which is the venue that she would go see all these artists that she had looked up to. And that was a moment that I thought was really cute because there are so many venues that you just like invent as your mind as like the place. And it's so major when you get to perform there for the first time.
She's like, I can't imagine being in high school in the green room and the headliner comes in and you're like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do with my body?
Yeah.
So she says at the end of the day, they stayed for the concert and the concert only had like 30 people. But to her, the fact that she had been so close to somebody doing it, like traveling around and playing their music, she was like, okay, maybe this is viable.
When I finished, I got a good job sweetie from my parents who generously allowed me to hang around for the rest of the show.
The next day, they go get food, her and her mom. And her mom says, I should have never let you take your guitar class. You should be thinking about colleges, not doing this weird thing.
So then they get into this massive fight. I could live without them, I thought to myself, with foolish teenage confidence. I could get a job, I could stay with friends, I could keep playing shows until someday the rooms were full. So she storms out of there and moves in with Colette and Nicole for a little while. And then without a proper home, she just stops going to class. She stops doing her assignments. She starts essentially failing out of school. The shift in mood and performance had been indicative of a mental breakdown.
I guess I wonder if it really was or if that's like a good way to say it so that colleges forgive you. I don't know, is it a mental breakdown to be like mad at your mom and move in with your friend for a few days and then a few days later be like, actually, this is too hard. I'm coming back?
It seems like the school stuff went on for a lot longer, and it seems like she was depressed.
Yeah, I believe she was depressed.
And I think that the term mental breakdown was so that she could still get into college.
When my midterm report card revealed that I was failing all my classes and my GPA had plummeted, my mother scheduled a meeting with the college counselor and begged for help. Frantically, she gathered the necessary documents, including the scrapped writing supplements, and sent them out to colleges I had previously shown interest in. When I finally returned home, I began to see a therapist who prescribed medication for some emotional breathing room and addressed a letter to accompany my college applications explaining that this shift in mood and performance had been indicative of a mental breakdown. That's some real private school. I know she didn't go to private school, but that's like a real private school terminology.
Spin.
Yeah.
So then she talks about right before leaving for college, the big fight that her and her mom got into. She decided to go to school on the East Coast because she knew they needed distance. And at one point they got into this huge fight. And she said, I'm not like you. I have more important things to think about than the way that I look. In one fell swoop, my mother gripped me by the hip and spun me around to strike my backside with her palm. She and her mom ended up physically fighting. And her mom said, I had an abortion after you because you were such a terrible child.
There it was. It was almost comical how she could have held such a secret so impressive my entire life, only to hurl it at such a moment. I knew there was no way I was truly to blame for the abortion, that she had said it just to hurt me as I had hurt her in so many monstrous configurations. More than anything, I was just shocked that she had withheld something so monumental. She did not need anyone. She could surprise you with how little she needed you. All those years she had instructed me to save 10% of myself like she did. I never knew that she meant she had been keeping a part of herself from me too. So now she's back in the present hearing that her mom is sick and thinking, well, this could be my chance, I thought, to make amends for everything, for all the burdens I'd imposed as a hyperactive child, for all the vitriol I spewed as a tortured teen, for hiding in department stores, throwing tantrums in public, destroying her favorite objects, for stealing the car, coming home on mushrooms, drunk driving in a ditch. I would radiate positivity and joy and it would cure her. I would wear whatever she wanted, complete every chore without protest. I would learn to cook for her, all the things she loved to eat, and I would single-handedly keep her from withering away. I would be the perfect daughter.
My mother, it turns out, did not have pancreatic cancer, but a rare form of stage 4 squamous cell carcinoma that had likely originated in the bile duct. So this is just completely different than what they'd initially done.
I mean, they said if they had gone forth with the first surgery, she would have bled out on the table. So I guess it's good they caught it this way. So she ends up quitting her 3 jobs, subletting her apartment, and putting her band on hiatus and going out to Eugene in May. She had a 2-week band tour in August, and she's like, I'll come back for that. But until then, I'm just going to live with my mom and help nurse her back to health.
She also reminisces about some of the moments of care that, although she knows she didn't grow up with a mommy mom, her mom expressed love and care in so many unique and different ways, and now she reflects on them. Her mom would always send her these care packages, and one time she got her these cowboy boots, and when she put on the cowboy boots, they'd already been broken in. And it turns out her mom had spent a week breaking these boots in before sending them to Michelle because she didn't want her to experience a moment of discomfort.
And so she gets home, and normally her mom is always there to pick her up at the baggage claim, but this time it's just her dad waiting outside in the car.
Her mom had just had her first chemo.
My father was happy as a provider. His mere existence in our lives was testament enough to how he'd transcended his own upbringing and overcome his addictions, and that counted for something. She gets through her father's childhood, which was pretty fucked up. His dad had gone to World War II, gotten stuck in a tree parachuting, and watched his entire platoon. Was it called a platoon?
Yeah, just like his group of guys.
His squad got murdered while he was stuck in a tree watching, and he came back pretty fucked up. So his mom escaped with the 4 children, and her father was the youngest and did not get a lot of attention and was also very abused by one of his older brothers. So she says when we were little, they were pretty close. They had special daddy-daughter things. He raised her like the son. And my father often blamed his work for the distance that grew between us. I was 10 when he took over his brother's business and his workload practically doubled. But the truth was his new position coincided with the purchase of our family's first desktop computer, which was when I first stumbled across the paid affairs he'd been scheduling with women online. It was a secret I kept from my mother my entire life.
Even at a young age, I was quick to rationalize my father's infidelity. He was a man with needs, and I assumed my parents must have come to some sort of understanding. But as I grew older, the secret began to fester. The stories grew tiresome and repetitive. His constant lack of sobriety was no longer endearing, the drunk driving after work irresponsible.
So she sees her mom, and her mom's like, I feel fine, just a little weak, but she won't eat.
And she keeps trying to cook these special foods that her mom had always made for her, and her mom just does not have any appetite, and she starts getting a little bit frustrated with what she's able to contribute.
It was not lost on me how different the circumstances were now. Here I was again, this time returned of my own free will, no longer scheming a wild escape into the dark, but desperately hoping that a darkness would not come in. So she keeps trying to feed her mom. Her mom will not take the food. She is not handling the chemo well. It's like overpowering her. I try to temper my frustration, transform my disappointment into the anxious patience of a new mother with a colicky infant. How often must my mother have negotiated with and maneuvered around my infantile pickiness? She keeps trying to get her mom to eat, but her mom won't take a bite. And then she starts getting incredibly ill and throwing up to the point where they're like, we don't think this is normal. They take her to the hospital. This was when we realized my mother had lost her mind. She started trying to jump out of the car, screaming. They had to like keep her locked in the car. And when they get to the doctor, they're like, you have to take her to the ER immediately, where they find out she's just severely dehydrated.
Her mom has to stay in the hospital for 2 weeks. Everything I'd ever done in my life felt so monumentally selfish and insignificant. I hated myself for not writing to Yumi every day she was sick. So this is her mom's younger sister who had just died from cancer. For not calling more, for not comprehending what Nami Imo had endured as a caretaker. I hated myself for not arriving in Eugene earlier, for not being at the appointments, for not knowing the signs to look out for.
Meanwhile, as she's trying to be strong for her mother, she feels like her father is just not taking on any of the burden. She can't even look at me, he said, beginning to blubber. We can't even look at each other without crying. He was a sensitive guy despite his grit. He did not know how to withhold any part of his truth. Unlike my mother, he saved no 10%. You have to promise you're going to be there for me, he said. Promise me, okay? I could not even cry in his presence for fear that he would take the moment over, pit his grief against mine in a competition of who loved her more and who had more to lose. Moreover, it shook me to my core that he had said out loud what I considered unspeakable, the possibility that she couldn't make it, that there could be an us without her. 3 weeks passed, and my mother began to turn a corner, regaining her strength by the end of June, just in time for her second treatment. So they end up having this woman who is her mother's friend from Japan when her father was briefly stationed there for a job, who she had kept in touch with and is also a woman who had moved to the States. She lives in Georgia with her husband. This woman, Kai, is going to come and take care of her. And immediately she shows up and the whole family feels like this relief because she's a little bit older than her mother and she is Korean. She knows all of her mother's favorite foods. She's able to like communicate in Korean to her. And she says like her mother just seems to really relax and release into this ability to be taken care of. That like there's an older woman here and she can mother Michelle's mom.
With my father beginning to flounder, her presence came as a relief. She asserted firmly, I'm here. So Kai is helping prepare all these meals and she wants to help cook, but Kai kind of takes over. And this is when she starts feeling a bit brushed aside.
And she's also starting to feel very threatened. She had in her mind, I think, this idea that's a bit glamorized, but not ill-intended, that she would come. Her mom would be able to teach her how to cook all of her own favorite meals. She would learn how to cook all this Korean food for her mother. They would bond, she would heal, and they would come out stronger for it. And so when Kai comes over and starts cooking and refuses to teach Michelle and really becomes like the matriarch of the household, Michelle not only feels, as Ashley said, like put aside, but she also is losing out this like valuable learning moment she thought she was going to get to have, where she'd be able to like stay in touch with her Korean roots. And even though she's not willing to say it out loud, I think part of it is this fear of like, if I don't learn now, will I lose this part of myself? And so then she starts talking about her childhood and how growing up in Eugene, she tried to like downplay and kind of resented her Korean half. And she hated going to Korean school. She didn't feel like she fit in with the kids of Korean school because they were mostly full Korean. But then she also felt too Korean to fit in with the white kids at her school. And it was something that she really struggled with.
She went to the gym and when she came home, Kai had shaved her mom's head because her hair had been falling out in big patches. I felt guilty for not having suggested we shave it earlier, and I couldn't help but feel a little left out that they had done it without me. And I think that these are the parts of the book that they're kind of uncomfortable, and I think they're really incredible to have written because there is I don't mean this in a mean way, but I think the words aren't nice. There is like a self-centeredness in grief because no one exists solely in themselves, right? We exist as part of a community, as part of a society and a world and a family and everything else. So no person is solely themselves. You exist as parts of other people as well. And so when you are a person witnessing someone else is struggling or dying or whatever, like the part of them in you is also struggling. And like that's all you can think of sometimes.
Especially like these heightened moments like death, I feel like weddings where everybody's coming in. The way that Kai acts also is somewhat self-centered and bizarre.
Yeah.
Like, of course, it's helpful and incredibly generous to come across the country and help take care of this woman who you don't even know that well. They had not physically seen each other for 20 years or something. But the way that she comes and implants herself in this family during this family's last few moments is also kind of like odd. Like this woman, Kai, when you find out her backstory later, she's very clearly fulfilling a need that she has never had met in her own life by having this opportunity to come and mother and love and be so desperately needed by Michelle's mom.
And Michelle really waffles between feeling so grateful for Kai's presence and her leadership and also feeling resentful of Kai's somewhat overstepping.
She said, Kai had been with us for 2 weeks and my parents began to rely on her more and more. I started to worry we wouldn't be able to care for my mother without her. My father was spending more time away from the house in town, and my mother naturally found it easier to ask for Kai's help and assistance. I suspected it hurt her pride to rely on me. Even in the throes of chemo, she'd often asked how I was doing or if my father and I had eaten. Kai refused to take any breaks despite our encouragement.
So Michelle takes on the role of a recorder because Kai wasn't really letting her cook and she wasn't able to cook the same way Kai could. She starts recording every calorie her mom takes in, her medicine schedules, every symptom that she can record, she records for the doctors.
And definitely as the relief from Kai's arrival starts to give way to jealousy that the truth is these may be her last few weeks with her own mother and they don't really want to share them with a stranger. So they finally take her mom to the hospital without Kai and they insist, no, don't come, let us do it. By the time we got back, Kai was manic. She emerged from my parents' bedroom to reveal she had shaved her head to match my mother's. She tipped a hip to the side, stretching her arms out and rolled her eyes languidly as she struck a pose in the hall. When her 3 weeks with us elapsed, Kai insisted she stay longer. Why have someone else fly in? She was up to speed and wanted to stay. My mother was relieved and grateful, but both my father and I had started to feel unsettled by her presence.
Why was this woman here? Didn't she miss her husband? Wasn't it odd for a 60-something-year-old woman to leave her home in Georgia to come stay with us for more than a month without any compensation? How self-absorbed was I to begrudge a woman who was selflessly volunteering to help?
Meanwhile, as her mom is on more and more pain medication, she's translating less and less. She's only speaking in Korean, and Kai is often not translating for the father and Michelle, which is like putting them at odds.
Yeah. It's this really complicated position where she also talks about trying to figure out how little medication she can give her mom to still provide her mom comfort. I didn't want her to be in pain, but I also didn't want to lose her completely. The doctor could see my frustration and prescribed a small dosage of Adderall to help counteract the effects of the painkillers. It is such a complicated thing to be like, you're a part of my life too, and I can't lose you.
Yeah. Kai had a very hard life, my mother said. Kai's father was a playboy. When he left Kai's mother for a new mistress, he made that mistress raise her. Then he met an even newer mistress, and he abandoned both of them. The mistress raised Kai her whole life and never even told her she wasn't her real mother. But Kai knew because she heard the rumors from all the people around town. So then when the mistress woman got the cancer, Kai took care of her until she died. Even on her deathbed, she never told Kai she wasn't her real mother, and Kai never told her she already knew. And now she's married to Woody. She's Woody's second wife, and his children never accepted her because she was an affair. Even though they've married for over 20 years now, his children are still cruel to her because of what they feel she did to their mother. She told me one time they made her so upset she had to go to a mental hospital. So I do think like this shows why it's so important for Kai to feel like she's building this family.
Yeah, but it's also like
not her family.
Yeah. So then we go back to the family in Korea. Halmoni, the grandma, had passed away. And then shortly afterwards, Yoonmi, the youngest daughter, so there was 3 sisters, and the youngest had stage 4 colon cancer. She had never been kissed. People like this did not get cancer. 24 chemotherapy treatments later, Yoonmi died on Valentine's Day, a cosmically cruel fate for a woman who had never known romantic love. Her last words were, "Where are we going?"
My mother's biggest takeaway from Yoonmi's death was that you could go through chemotherapy 24 times and still die. And that was a trial she was unwilling to endure. When she first received her diagnosis, she committed herself to 2 treatments, and if they were unsuccessful, she told us she did not want to continue. If it weren't for my father and me, I'm not sure she would have gone through with it at all.
So then it's the end of the summer, and she returns to Philadelphia for their 2-week tour. She's nervous to leave, but her parents are like, what else can you do but just go do these shows? And so she goes out, they're doing the shows, and she gets a call from her parents that the tumor has not shrunk at all and her mom will not be doing further treatment.
They decide instead of committing to death, they just want to keep living life. And so the last thing she wants to do is make sure she can go back to Korea one more time to see her sister. There are small markets in Seoul you haven't been to yet, she said. I never took you to Gwanjang Market, where ajumas have been there for years and years, making bindaetok and different types of jeon. I don't know how to say all those things, sorry. You'll have to guess what they're going to eat.
So she gets to Korea. She meets her parents there. She flies in from the East Coast and they fly in from Eugene. And when she arrives at her aunt's apartment, her mom has a very serious fever. The fever had started before they left, he admitted. Not wanting to cancel the trip, he'd pressed her body to his, willing it to stop, willing his body heat to cure her. She insists that they go to the hospital, even though the mom does not want to go and the dad doesn't want her to go because they all think that if she goes to the hospital, she'll never leave.
But of course they have to go, so they get her there. And sure enough,
It's bad.
It's really bad. It feels like no matter what they're solving, there's a new problem. Every time they get one thing at bay, something else swells up. She's just in pain.
And for reference, this is August, and I think she had been diagnosed in like May.
Yeah. And she dies in October, mid-October.
Yeah.
So they're there for a few weeks, and Michelle decides that she wants to get married.
Yeah, she calls Peter, her boyfriend, and says, we have to get married.
And she says, if you think that we're going to get married in 5 years' time, we need to do it now. Because if we wait and she's not there, I'll never forgive you.
And I think it's true. Like, I think it is effective. She thinks having something to look forward to will help her mom pull through. And only talking about medication and calories and treatments and bed sores and symptoms, like, it's not fun. And being able to say, like, and what about this dress too?
Yeah.
Like, kind of adds a little bit of optimism to the conversation.
And they're also talking about her dad. She goes to the hospital every night, which I get like a day shift and a night shift, but she's like, I get there every day at 6 p.m. and I stay until my dad comes back the next day at noon. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not really like an equal splitting. I would say 6 p.m. till 12 p.m. That's a really long shift.
I would say that's 3/4 and 1/4 almost exactly, is it not?
You know, your dad should really be the one that's here. I like being here. Yes, but he's my husband. Even when he's here, he doesn't know how to take care of me at all. When I ask him to do the mouthwash, he just hands it to me. He doesn't even give me a cup.
Oof. Dude, men, if you're a man listening to this right now, I know that you're in the car. I know you guys are on a road trip right now and you guys are in the car together and this is a podcast that you guys can agree on and I'm grateful for that. But men, this is a message for you only. Girls, close your ears. Take better fucking care of people, okay? Just learn it. No one should have to tell you what to do all the time. You could just look around and help.
And she's worried about what will happen between her and her father when her mom goes. She's like, we never planned for this. We always assumed that my dad, who drinks and drives and did crystal meth and smokes and used to share needles at the height of the AIDS epidemic, like there's no way he's the one that lives. So she's like, I just don't know what to do. Like, I don't know what our family will look like when you leave. And she says, you'll do whatever you have to.
So then she talks about how she met Peter. Peter seems like a sweetie Petey. She fell in love with him the first minute she saw him. And then it took him a couple of years to fall in love with her back. They started working together at a restaurant. And then he got attacked on his way home one night. Someone hit him in the head with a brick and he shattered his orbital bone. And then she brought him flowers at the hospital. And all of a sudden he was in love with her.
Yeah, she got him a job at their Mexican restaurant that she worked at.
Yeah. And everyone joked that the muggers had knocked some sense into him with a brick. But it was really sweet to read just like a little love letter moment to him because, again, not to knock anything about this book. I think it is beautifully written and very honest. But I think that something about grief turns a lot of people into side characters in your life. And even throughout the engagement and the wedding and everything, Peter is very much a minor background character in the story of grief because there is just not that much capacity in one person.
Yeah.
Also, I will say one thing, though. She talks about how much he's hotter than her. I looked them up and he's handsome, but like in no way did I look at him and say like,
yeah, but you're looking at them. She's post glow up and he's post brick.
That's true.
Imagine his orbital bone when it was as God intended. Can I say it's hard to be hot post brick to the face?
Okay, well, looking at them now, I'll say they've evened out.
They've evened out. It took her like a Met Gala stylist and him
a brick to the head.
And now they're perfectly even.
So they start planning the wedding. One thing she loves about her mom is that her mom isn't religious. Mm-hmm. She loves that her mom rejected spiritual conformity.
So they spend the next 3 weeks like
planning the wedding
as fast as they can. Peter's family seems very sweet and on board. They have 100 people there. That's a good showing for a 3-week turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
Kai has their mom converted to Christianity just in case right before.
Yeah.
Every day leading up to the wedding, my mother and I would walk the circumference of the house. She'd set a goal to slow dance with her son-in-law, and we were working on building up her stamina.
She talks about her parents' love. My father made no secret of the fact that my parents were rarely intimate. In spite of my secret knowledge, I had always believed that he truly loved her, and life was just like that sometimes. Her father also seems like kind of a dumbass, but she's really grasping at straws here to give him some credit.
Obviously, he wasn't a perfect father or husband, but there is something to say that it was like till death do us part. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, they were 2 adults who lived in the same house for like 35 years.
Yeah. She's getting ready for her wedding. I was self-conscious without my mother's supervision. When we were finished, I headed downstairs anxious for her approval. And she's waiting for her mom to say something is out of place or something isn't right. And her mom just keeps on saying how beautiful she looks. Maybe deep down she knew what was best, that small criticisms weren't worth it anymore.
They end up having a wedding. It seems very lovely. Everybody goes to party after. After last call, Peter and I returned to our hotel bed, too drunk to touch one another, and fell asleep side by side as husband and wife.
So then her dad starts planning another trip to go wine tasting. If we always had something to look forward to, maybe we could trick this disease.
Not now, Cancer. There's a wedding, and then a tasting in Napa. Then an anniversary, a birthday. Come back when we're not so busy.
And then Kai has kind of a freak out. So Kai and the mom are talking in Korean, and the dad keeps saying, "What did she say? What did she say?" And Kai finally explodes and says, "You two are so selfish." She storms off and she packs up to go.
So I guess it seems like her mom had said in Korean, like, okay, it's time for you to leave now. And Kai took it very personally, like attack from the father and Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
The father is like freaking out. He goes, no, wait, just like wait till tomorrow. Wait till she's gonna die soon. Like you can't leave yet. But of course, the right thing I think is for them to be alone together. Mom, Kai is leaving, I said, returning to her bedside. Instead, she just looked up at me with a big dreamy smile. I think she had fun, she said.
A few days later, her mom shoots up in pain and she screams out pain in Korean. My father and I frantically administered liquid hydrocodone under her tongue. Minutes felt like hours as we held her, reassuring her over and over that it would pass. As she settled into a deep sleep sandwiched between us, I filled with insurmountable sadness. The doctor had lied to us. He'd told us she wouldn't feel any pain. He told us it was his job to make sure of it. My mother's last words were pain. So after this, the mom is never lucid enough to speak again.
Yeah, they just keep her on drugs because they don't want her to feel pain until one day Peter comes in. She says, "Mom, I'm going upstairs to sleep." And when she wakes up, he says,
she's gone.
Yeah.
And this part is so interesting. We don't need to get into the weeds of it, but she talks about this line between life and death and how it just isn't as clear as you would think. She kept on hoping that the tides would turn and her mom would, wake back up one day and be able to have a last conversation or talk to her. But instead, she was just waiting in and out of this room every day, like not sure when her mom would take her final breath.
Finally, they call the police who come and take the body.
She has a very traumatic memory of putting her mom in her final outfit. It felt wrong to talk to anyone, to smile or to laugh or to eat again, knowing that she was dead. They went to this farm to just pass the time because they didn't know what else to do with the day. She starts planning the funeral.
Her dad makes most of the funeral arrangements. The one thing she picks is what the tombstone says, and she decides she wants it to say lovely mother, wife, and best friend. Lovely was an adjective my mother adored. She told me once that if pressed to describe me in a single word, lovely would be the one she'd choose. She felt it encompassed an ideal beauty and ardor. However, when they see the tombstone,
it says loving,
and they're very upset about it.
So then the family arrives and her mom's older sister just absolutely breaks down. I'd never seen her this way. Nami Imo was always so extraordinarily composed. The interior of the house, so thoroughly my mother's and so haunted by her absence, threw her into hysterics. I tried to imagine how she must feel to be the eldest and have watched her two baby sisters die within a few years of each other of the same disease. There was a reception and she just doesn't know how to act. I tried to be stoic. I tried to conceal my tears from my family, and at last they were all funneling out.
She ends up becoming, just to pass the time, she becomes obsessed with creating incredibly decadent meals and following YouTube cooking recipes. And so she'll spend all day making lobster and risotto and just anything heavy until she abandons it and starts just making the porridge that her mom had been eating the past few months. And then one evening, someone drops off a letter in a ceramic jar, and inside it's the most heart-wrenching letter from her mother's friend that she had at art class. After her aunt passed away, her mom signed up for an art class with two other Korean women, and it seems like they just had a really beautiful relationship, and the card is so sweet.
There was part of me that felt or maybe hoped that after my mother died, I had absorbed her in some way, that she was a part of me now. I wondered if her art teacher felt this way too, that I was the closest she could get to being heard. And then she goes back to the relationship she had with her mom. She returns home from college for winter break, and now they're getting along a lot better. The distance has really helped their relationship. And her mom says, "You know what I realized? I've just never met someone like you. I've just never met someone like you, as if I were a stranger from another town or an eccentric guest accompanying a mutual friend to a dinner party. It was a strange thought to hear from the mouth of a woman who had birthed and raised me, with whom I had shared a home for 18 years, and someone who was half me. My mother had struggled to understand me just as I struggled to understand her. We were opposite sides of a fault line, generational, cultural, linguistic. Then what would have been the most fruitful years of understanding were cut violently short, and I was left alone to decipher secrets of the inheritance without its key. Living without her mom, she has all these regrets and fears. She worries she didn't try hard enough to keep her mom healthy, that she didn't do enough as her caretaker. Her and her dad get busy just organizing her mom's things, and they decide to take a trip to Southeast Asia. We figured maybe if we were busy taking in a place that neither of us had been, we could manage to forget just for a moment how much our lives had fallen apart.
They get there and immediately she's miserable.
Yeah.
All I wanted to do was go home. I longed to hide in my bedroom and disassociate with the comforts of my PlayStation and its soothing farming simulation games. Not wake up at 6 a.m. to take a van tour of another pagoda and marketplace while my father bartered for half an hour over the equivalent of a couple USD. They end up getting into like a huge fight, of course, and then just moseying on.
Yeah, her dad says your mother warned me to not let you take advantage of me. And she has a meltdown about what this must have meant, like when it must have been said. Was this a last conversation they had? Had she been working so hard to prove herself like a dutiful daughter only to have her mom still say, you know, she's this way? Or was this a conversation that happened way back when she was in college after she'd had, you know, those rough high school years? It like really sends her spiraling.
In the morning, my father and I met for breakfast at the hotel buffet. We didn't talk about our fight and continued on with the trip as if it never happened.
And she's able to really put herself in her father's shoes and empathize more. Cheated out of a childhood, out of a father, and now he'd been cheated again. Robbed of the woman he loved just a few years shy of their final chapter.
We had come to Vietnam in search of healing to emerge closer to each other in our grief, but we returned just as damaged and separate as ever. He gets into a car accident almost as soon as they get home, and he was obviously drunk driving, but the cop lets him off when she shows up crying and being like, my mom just died.
Part of me wondered if he had run himself off the road on purpose, which only made me more upset. I made little effort to check in on him. I wanted to be selfish. I didn't want to take care of anyone else. Instead, I began to cook. Mostly the kind of food you could crawl into and that required sleeping off.
By Christmas, Peter's class, he had at this point been working as an adjunct professor in philosophy, were finally finished and he moved in with us. The two of us picked out a Christmas tree from the nursery down the road. Without my mother, it felt like we were playing house.
See, this is what I mean of like Peter just is kind of there bopping along with whatever is needed. But that's what makes me like him so much is just like, that's a good partner, is someone who's like, I guess I'll live in Eugene, Oregon with you and your dad who you're not like enjoying the presence of because that's what you need right now. And she also, as she's like in this cooking momentum, she goes back to this woman that she found on YouTube who's Korean and very comforting in the way she speaks. It reminds her a lot of her mom. And she learns how to make this dish that Kai had made for her mom that she had asked, can you teach me how to make that? And Kai had brushed her off. And so now she's like able to, through this YouTube lady, inherit some of her mother's cooking by like using the directions from the lady on YouTube and then the muscle memory of the way her mom would show her.
She ends up getting a job at a local pizzeria cooking pizzas, thinking it's going to be like this therapeutic Julia Roberts situation. And of course, it ends up being horrible. For some reason, her shift is like 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. every day. And Peter's just picking her up at 6 a.m. being like, for the love of God, please quit. You're covered in burns and flour. And it's 6 a.m. and you make no money. It wasn't about the money. I wanted to stay as busy as possible. I wanted to work my body as hard as it could go so that there was no time to feel sorry for myself, to bind myself to a routine that would keep me grounded in the last remaining months before Peter and I left Eugene for good.
But also while she's doing this, she writes an entire album. And then her friend from high school who taught her how to play guitar, who like she had a crush on, and then Peter are able to help her record this album in a little bedroom studio. And they call it Psychopomp. And she releases it under the name Japanese Breakfast. So she and Peter are going to take a honeymoon to Korea and then move to New York City. We had planned to hunker down with a couple of 9-to-5s and finally commit to the transition to normal adulthood. So they've given up on showbiz. They go to Korea. She spends some lovely time with her aunt.
She feels very guilty because now that she sees what her aunt went through taking care of the grandmother and her little sister, not Michelle's, her aunt's sister, she's like, I don't know if they even want to see me. I feel like I'm nothing but another burden to them. But of course, her aunt, I think, if anything, going through all that pain with your family, what you want is to celebrate with the family that's alive and stay close to the people that you can. So of course, her aunt is very welcoming.
She also starts feeling so guilty for having not paid attention in Korean school when she was younger because she just wishes so badly that she could really talk to her aunt because her aunt is the only one who really understands what she's going through. But the communication is very stilted just because they're going through translators every time they speak. Her aunt also gives her insight into her mom's abortion and says that the reason her mom decided not to have the second child is because she might not have been able to travel to Korea as often because it would be hard with 2 children. And like the connection to Korea was more important to her.
So she like returns to the States. She's having horrible dreams about her mom.
And this is when she really becomes obsessed with cooking. She gets a job at an advertising agency. I think it's Colossal. For the most part, I felt very well adjusted. Everything was so unfamiliar, a new big city to live in, a real grown-up job. I tried not to dwell on what could not be changed and to throw myself into productivity, but every so often I was plagued by flashbacks. Oh, and then she starts going to therapy. And I will say, you have to shop for a therapist. She just starts going to a therapist with a $100 copay, which in the scheme of New York is a pretty affordable therapist, I guess. And she's like, it's just not a productive time. So she decides to do other self-care, which brings her back to the cooking lady on YouTube.
She becomes obsessed with making kimchi and different dishes. Soon enough, I was driving out to Flushing to stock up on salted shrimp, red pepper flakes, and soybean paste. After an hour in traffic, I found 5 different H Marts to choose from. I discovered the one in Union Street in the height of the summer.
I started making kimchi once a month, my new therapy. I reserved an older batch for cooking stews, pancakes, and fried rice, and newer batches for side dishes. When I'd made more than enough to eat, I started pawning it off on friends.
In October, a year after my mom died, my father put our house up for sale. He sent me the listing, and she just talked about how weird it was to look at her home. The accompanying photographs were unsettling, so familiar and yet so strange in their new context.
Her dad was in Thailand, where he'd planned to move after the house was sold. And so for Thanksgiving, so now it's a little over a year after her mom died and her second Thanksgiving without her mom, she tries to keep her mom's traditions alive. So her mom would always bring tempura sweet potatoes to Thanksgiving, and everyone always loved them. But at Peter's family Thanksgiving, they go pretty much untouched.
The only thing she had sent to her from the house was a kimchi refrigerator that her mom had used, and she saw that it was packed full of photos of her as a child.
She was my champion. She was my archive. She had taken the utmost care to preserve evidence of my existence and growth, capturing me in images, saving all my documents and possessions. I had thought fermentation was controlled death, left alone, a head of cabbage molds and decomposes. It becomes rotten and inedible, but when brined and stored, the course of its decay is altered.
The memories I had stored I could not let fester, could not let trauma infiltrate and spread to spoil and render them useless. They were moments to be tended. The culture we shared was active, effervescent in my gut and in my genes, and I had to seize it, foster it, and not let it die.
The lessons she imparted, the proof of her life, lived on in me in my every move and deed. It was what she left behind. If I could not be with my mother, I would be her.
About after a year, Peter and I moved to Brooklyn. The little record I had written in the cottage at the bottom of my parents' property started to receive a surprising amount of attention. It gets promoted by a small label. She ends up being asked to open for Mitski in an American tour. It keeps growing, and then she's headlining in her own right. She goes back to her hometown and gets to headline the Wow Theater. She ends up getting to do Coachella, Bonnaroo.
And the Wow Theater is that room that she was so excited to open for with 30 people in it when she was in high school.
So she's becoming who she had always idolized, and she even ends up getting to go to Europe and then Asia, where she ends her tour in Seoul. She invites her aunt, who's still there, and her stepkids.
I had moved to New York to put my creative ambitions aside and focus my energy on climbing the corporate ladder, but all signs seemed to indicate that it wasn't quite time to hang up my hat. So she tells her aunt and her cousins that she's going to be coming back for a show, and she'd been trying to keep in touch with them, but because they don't speak the same language, most of keeping in touch was photos of the food she was making. So then when she tried to tell them she was coming back for a concert, it was sort of out of nowhere that suddenly she's headlining an international tour.
So she's opening this show that she's headlining in her mom's home country, and I hadn't believed in a God since I was about 10. But if there was a God, it seemed my mother must have her foot on his neck, demanding good things come my way. If we had to be ripped apart right at our turning point, just when things were starting to get really good, the least God could do was make a few of her daughter's pipe dreams come true.
The years that followed my mother's passing were suspiciously charmed.
Before our last song, I thanked my aunt and uncle for coming, looked up at them on the balcony. Emo, welcome to my hosa, I said, extending an arm to the crowd. Welcome to my office. The band posed for a picture with our fingers in the heart pose Nami taught us, the sold-out crowd in the background. So they end up staying a few days, going around Seoul with her aunt.
Her aunt says to her, I think Halmoni, Yumi, and your mom are very happy, Nami said. She flipped the heart charm on the necklace I gave her facing forward. They're in heaven together, playing Watu and drinking soju, happy that we are here together. And she talks about the way that they have this day together that feels very mother-daughter. And they kind of come to the realization that the thing that they're desiring from each other, parts of it are there. I could feel Nami searching for something in me that I'd spent the last week searching for in her. Not quite my mother, not quite her sister. We existed in a moment as each other's next best thing.
Final thoughts?
I mean, I think this was a very beautiful book about grief and loss and the unfairness of life and the fruitfulness when you keep pushing forward and you allow yourself to dwell in the moments that kind of take you down, but lift yourself up out of those moments stronger.
I also think it was like well done about a very complicated relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a very beautiful book and I really liked it this third time around.
Yeah.
It still gets me.
I really can't fathom the ability to both process grief in this way and then reprocess it through these words in order to write this book. I think it's a really important thing for people to talk about because everyone has a take on grief and everyone has grieved. And so to sit there and just get into the weeds and the ingredients and the recipe of your experience and be able to share that with people, like no two people are exactly alike. No one has the same experiences. So when you try to like write a book for everyone, you write a book for no one. But when you write a book this specific for yourself, I think it is for a lot more people.
How many drinks would you like to have with Michelle? How many wormtinis?
Oh my God, like 7.
How fertile was the soil?
As like a celebrity memoir,
0.
not fertile, but like as a book, there's a lot to chew on.
Yeah. No, I really loved it. I give it a 4.5, 4.75.
Yeah.
All right. And who do we hope never dies?
Oh, we love our 5-star wormies.